Okay, so we have about 5 people who have joined us now, and I'm going to change everybody from an attendee to a panelist. So if anything weird happens on someone's end, I'm just trying to make it so that we can see everybody. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll just wait a few more minutes for a few others to join us, and then we'll get going in fairly soon.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it another 2 minutes. We're missing a few people who have signed up, so hopefully they'll be able to join us by then.
Like your dog, Keith.
I told her she didn't register, so she's not supposed to be here. She's real sick today.
Lisa, how about 1 more minute and then we'll get ready to rock and roll.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
If I could just also thank Lisa for sending the snow we're getting tonight. We're getting about 5 centimeters of snow overnight and freezing rain. So thanks for sending it our way.
Oh no, gosh, the last thing you need out there.
I know.
Although thank God it's not here. We've already had our turn.
Yeah, well, thanks for sending it. We'll see if we can send it back.
We didn't know if you'd be showing up in a boat there, Keith, from Ottawa.
We did some sandbagging on Saturday night, the family, and it's just devastating seeing the amount of homes and how deep that water is. It's just, and it's still rising. So it's worse than 2017, they're saying.
Well, our thoughts are with you.
We're fortunate we're on a hill, so we're totally fine. But there's a lot of people that's impacted.
Okay. I think we're doing pretty good here. Okay, I think we're going to have a few more people join us, and hopefully by the end of the introduction, they will have joined us. So welcome everyone. My name is Mary Beth Whiten, and I'm the co-chair of the new Grassroots in Canada organization called DAC, which is Dementia Advocacy Canada. And with us today is the co-chair, Lisa Poole, who's kind of going to be in the background for the technical information. Also, Keith Barrett, who's a member of the exec team. Paul Lee and myself, Paul Lee is a member, will be hosting today's meeting, and it's going to be quite exciting. Nolanda will help us understand what she's up to in the area of wayfinding. Just a little splash about DAC, Dementia Advocacy Canada, before we get going. This is a group of people living with dementia and care partners, and we understand the importance of working together collaboratively, and this is where very much what I'm going to call it a movement is about. And so we are working hard on a number of different initiatives, and we're narrowing down those initiatives to 3 major categories. So if you're interested in this, please, we'd love to have your support. It doesn't take much, just join up on the website. With that, I'm just going to hand this over to Paul. So Paul, if you can do our introduction, please, for today's seminar.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Noella Anna Neubauer. She is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Alberta and is supervised by Dr. Lily Liu. Her PhD focuses on developing a conceptual model that guides choices of proactive strategies for persons with dementia and at the risk of getting lost. She is co-founder of the International Consortium on Dementia and Wayfinding. Her research interests are diverse and include technologies, knowledge of remobilization, and policy. So Noella, there you go.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and to everyone with Lisa Poole and Mary Beth for inviting me. It's an honor to be the first person to provide this webinar, and so hopefully I do it justice. So the way that I've designed this presentation is I've kept it very flexible. I know that I really want to be able to see your guys' feedback, have conversations. Really, the whole piece is to talk about this issue of wayfinding and persons with dementia at risk of getting lost. So feel free to pause me if at any point when I'm through the presentation, we can have a quick conversation. And then if there's any other interests that you have above and beyond what I presented today, feel free to let me know, and we can always have those different kinds of talks. So just one second here, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my presentation. Alrighty. Perfect. So hopefully everyone can see this. So really what I'm going to speak about today is just providing a presentation, and I've titled it Stakeholder-Driven Approaches in Wayfinding Research. So the importance of partnerships to enhance design and strategy acceptance for persons living with dementia. The reason why I gave this title the way it is that I have learned from many experiences from talking to individuals, is that us as researchers, sometimes we're not seen from the positive lens. We're seeing where we end up taking persons with dementia's information and care partners. We might include them a little bit at the end, and then that's the end of it. And Mary Beth already alluded to this at the beginning of this webinar, is really talking about this importance of partnerships. How can researchers, persons with dementia, care partners, everyone working together, and for my topic specifically around wayfinding. So one second here. So the first thing that I always like to use is I always like to talk about the issue at hand. So wandering, wayfinding, getting lost. So many questions that we always end up getting is, why exactly do research and work in this field? And so this slide essentially depicts why. It is estimated that 3 in 5 Canadians with dementia will wander. And for families, many times it can be an emotionally wrenching experience. The consequences of wandering and getting lost range from minor injuries, high search and rescue costs, and even death. And in the case, for example, such as Shinno that you can see on the slide here, that become lost or sometimes never found. And so this really begins to raise question as to how exactly can we begin to deal with this issue. And we can start to see that there's been more of an influx in the number of missing persons calls involving this population, to the point that we've had police, we've had persons with dementia, community organizations coming to us as researchers and trying to question how exactly can we begin to deal with this issue, because it's becoming so severe. And this stems even other talks, things such as silver alerts in Canada. So I'm sure many of you might have heard of it, that there was actually a petition that was done to the government of Canada requesting for a silver alert, or some kind of way of using like an amber alert to try to alert the public to find a missing older adult. And really, there's been a lot of questions, just how can we deal with this? As we as researchers begin to look at strategies and different ways of being able to solve this problem, one of the problems that come with currently what researchers have done up until today is that they look at strategies around wayfinding, but most of the work is only done in lab-based environments. So if you want to think about locating technologies, if you look into our published world, the stuff that we end up looking at when we publish things in journals, it's only done in a lab-based environment. It doesn't involve persons with dementia at all, sometimes barely at the end. And so that really gives us alarm bells as to, if we're developing a certain type of technology or strategy or initiative, if we're not involving the population we're trying to help to begin with, many cases, these strategies, they end up sitting on a shelf, or they don't even make it into market. And so really, we're investing millions of dollars in different types of strategies that's not going anywhere. And the problem comes right down to us as researchers trying to involve this population right from the beginning. And so really, and then again, it's trying to bring in this whole partnership piece, is that researchers have to work directly with the person with dementia from the beginning, trying to understand the question itself. So as a researcher, I might think that something might be a problem, but if you do consultations with the person with dementia and the care partner, many times it's not so big of an issue to them. So really, as a researcher, we're supposed to be the ones that listen to the person with dementia and the care partners. What are you guys experiencing? And then can we start to use our knowledge to work together to try to solve that problem? And then that would further increase the outcomes that would come with trying to deal with this issue of wayfinding. And above and beyond involving the person with dementia, I always like to use this slide to just show that we're all working together as a community. It's more than just the end user. Many times you can assist the person with dementia and the care partner, but when we're dealing with lost persons with dementia, it's that the families are impacted. Their social networks are influenced by that if their loved one has gotten lost. Organizations, so police organizations, have been at the forefront of trying to deal with this issue and figuring out how they can find this population as soon as possible. Alzheimer's societies, those are the ones that we also have to think of as well, and other community organizations. I have learned from my own experience that while Alzheimer's societies are amazing, when you speak on behalf of some of our rural communities, so at least my experience in rural Alberta, is that unfortunately Alzheimer's societies don't work as closely with them. So then you have to look at other organizations that might be helpful. And then, of course, we always have to think about public policy. So if we're talking about technologies, if we're talking about strategies, they're great, but they come at a particular cost. And so how can we begin to involve our governments in terms of trying to subsidize these different types of strategies and really helping to allow the movement of how we deal with this issue? And so thinking about all this bringing together, one of the major initiatives that I have been a part of is the International Consortium on Dementia and Wayfinding. So I was one of the co-founders alongside another student. Her name is Katie Gamgay-Ross out of the University of Edinburgh. And this partnership or this relationship that her and I had all started from our lovely Ron Bellino, who is online. So Katie and I were both on Twitter. Ron felt it was a perfect opportunity for Katie and I, as well as another woman, Fiona Didcock from Thames Valley Police in the UK. He thought we decided we needed to talk, and because we had many similarities. And the funny thing is that was about, it was a year and a half ago, and we had these conversations just around, we as researchers are not speaking to each other. We're on our own little tiny rounds. We're not involving the key different stakeholders that need to be involved in this issue. And while what I might be doing in Canada, Katie might be doing something similar in the UK. And really, this isn't an Alberta issue. This isn't a Canada issue. This is a global issue when we're dealing with lost persons with dementia. So how can we bring not only the researchers together, but how can we bring everyone that's invested in this issue together to really allow major movements to move forward? So keep in mind that this group was very young. The conversation only started a year and a half ago. And the consortium really wasn't quite born until about, I'd say about 8 months ago, when we started to bring in some of the major researchers that were pretty much the pioneers of this field. And since that time, we have over 10 countries that are now a part of this consortium. That's how fast it moves. But it's because we understand that this is a huge issue, and because now people understand that there's an organization that's coming together, that it can allow movements to happen. And then this slide is a perfect example. These are our current consortium members that are part of it. We have about 50 members, and almost every other day I get a request for someone else that is interested to be a part of this consortium. So as you can see, we have funders such as AgeWell that I'm a part of. The focus is on technologies for older adults. Members from Alberta Health Services, lovely Lisa Poole and Dementia Connections, the Alzheimer's Societies in Canada, the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario has been absolutely amazing for not only this work, but everything else that I've done with them. CARIA in Calgary, think of Missing People. It's a charitable organization in the UK that is advocates for missing persons. So really, we've really begun to band together, and it's been quite exciting to see all these different groups that are a part of it. And I'm happy to say as well, Paul Lee is going to be one of our dementia representatives as well. So really trying to get all these key groups together to start to have these conversations. And so since we started to bring things together, of course, great, you have a great group of people, but what are we about and what are we capable of doing? And I'm sure that Dementia Advocacy Canada, you guys have been trying to figure out the same thing of what you're capable of. So for us, the way that we decided to plan to do it was we first ran a meeting last February in Calgary. And the way that it worked was we had two of our key players. So Katie actually flew in from Scotland. She flew into Calgary. Unfortunately, her and her supervisor, Charlotte Clark, they came in when it was minus 35 in Calgary. So I felt so bad for them. But they were troopers, and they were able to get through the cold Canadian winter for the few days they were there. And we had members from the Alberta Health Services, and we had we had police flying in from Ottawa. And in addition to into this, we also had where we kept it open with Zoom. Zoom has been incredible in the sense of trying to keep people connected. So aside from us in Calgary, we had people that were Zooming in from the UK. Australia has been a little tricky just because they're a weird time in comparison to us, so we're still trying to figure out how to include them more. But it was really cool because we had about 4 countries at one point that were...
Clean now to fix these issues.
Okay. Sorry, I thought it was someone asking a question. Anyways, I'll keep going. So with this Calgary meeting, it was 2 days, and we were starting to sift and try to figure out what we were capable of, and then we moved that forward. And actually only got back about a month ago. We ran a consortium meeting in Edinburgh, Scotland. And so we ended up having another dementia representative, who I forgot to mention in Calgary. We had Roger Marple, who again is, I'm sure many of you know of Roger. He has been a huge supporter, so he was there to help guide us along the questions. And then in Edinburgh, we ended up having Agnes Houston, who was there from Glasgow. So we're really trying to make sure that persons with dementia are represented. And we had many other organizations that were there. The Missing Persons Unit from the UK were there. And at the end of the day, when it came to these 2 meetings, we sat down and we finally were able to figure out what the consortium can do. And really, we see ourselves as this huge hub of knowledge mobilization or knowledge exchange. So we've in the process of developing a website website. In fact, we just had a meeting with our developer this morning just to start to complete the website itself. But essentially the way that the website will turn into is that whether it's individuals that are members or part of the website, even people that are interested in the consortium itself, essentially what we'll end up having is we'll have availability for webinars, we'll have blogs so we can share our information, as well as any type of information that is coming from each country, whether I'm developing a series of guidelines or there's a new alert system coming from the UK, all this information is going to be there. And we're also in the works of having where it's almost a communication board. So if individuals such as yourselves have a problem around wayfinding that you want to tackle, you can message it on that board, and then you can start to bring people together and actually have teams come. So a perfect example of some of this collaboration is that I'm actually one of the authors of a systematic review that is being done out of Australia. So that was our way of connecting. So I'm bringing in my Canadian perspective with the Australians. And another perfect example as well is that you have to think the Calgary meeting was only in February. We had a woman by the name of Brenda Poole. She's with Home Care with Alberta Health Services. They ended up presenting on the Herbert protocol that they're using in the UK. So it's kind of a net measure of being able to collect the information if someone that's gone missing and sending it off. Brenda was so fascinated with what they were using in the UK that she's presently working on implementing it throughout the city of Calgary. So that got to think that was only a few months ago, and some people are trying to implement something. And then in addition to that, learning that there's multiple alert systems. So Ron Bellino and I and my team at University of Alberta have been working on Community ASAP as a means of like a type of silver alert to be able to keep the eyes on the ground to find someone. And we've learned that there was a purple alert that's being done in Scotland, and there's another alert system being done in Sweden. So again, the consortium can turn into this hub where we're the ones that are having all the different types of alert systems, different strategies, and we can be the ones to help support other countries that are interested in the initiatives going on in other countries. So hopefully we can allow this movement to happen even further. And then also in terms of the movement of policy, we've been working really hard to try to keep our governments aware of what is going on with the consortium. I've been working closely with right now the Alberta Dementia Strategy and within Alberta Health Services as well. And we're hoping that they're quite interested in this symposium, but we're hoping we could branch this across the country. So many of you are from all over the place, so hopefully we can tap into the government within Ontario and really start to get our governments to start speaking to each other and even seeing if they can start to learn what other countries are using. So really it's that knowledge mobilization exchange. And then one final piece before I move on to the next slide as well is even our police. It's been great, like Ottawa Police Service. We have Jamie on here from Secure. We're all talking to other police organizations as well in the UK and that. So it's really cool. I'm hearing all these side conversations that are happening since the consortium started. So a true interdisciplinary partnership field that we've been able to foster. And of course, the next steps of this group, as we're, again, continuing to try to figure things out, is we have another meeting in Liverpool, England. I get to go back there again, which is exciting for the Missing Persons Conference. And again, just trying to figure out other events, other things that we can do to be involved. And for those of you that are joining in, if at any point you want to become interested and be a part of the consortium, again, I'll have my contact information, but we're always more than welcome to hear from all of you. And so now the next piece, or maybe even before I move on, does anyone have any questions about the consortium before I move on to talk about my thesis?
Any questions as of yet?
Okay, perfect. Well, then I'll just keep going, and I'm sure there'll be more questions and that along the line. So now the next piece to talk about this whole aspect of involving persons with dementia and care partners is around my doctoral thesis. So essentially, again, the question that came into mind was actually inspired, again, by Ron. Everyone knows that Ron kind of has been fostering many of us within the research world in Canada, as well as through Polly and Roger Marple, have really been my true inspirations in terms of trying to tackle this issue of there's a lot of strategies that are out there. So I spoke about, potential silver alerts, but there's also all these different GPS devices. There's all these different things that are coming out there. But what I had learned is that while there's a lot of strategies, there isn't a guideline to help people choose a particular strategy for themselves. And so as a result, it's been pushing for a one-size-fits-all approach, saying, oh yeah, GPS is going to solve all of our solutions. But the problem with GPS is it has its own downfalls. So really, I ended up learning that some kind of guideline needed to be developed, and then that would turn into my doctoral thesis. So the slide that you see in front of you pretty much was a systematic review that I conducted just to confirm the conversations I had with the community, where I ended up looking through what is available in the published world with us as researchers, but also just using Google and seeing what is available just on regular commercial websites. And what I had learned is essentially there was more than 183 different types of strategies for persons with dementia that are at risk of getting lost for high tech. So high tech thinking all like the fancy GPS stuff, and then even the lower tech solutions. So things such as using distraction strategies, exercise, that kind of thing. And so that really just highlighted and confirmed that there's a lot of strategies and a guideline was needed because nothing was available. And so essentially for the next few slides, I'm just going to describe to you kind of what I did for my thesis and the outcome that you see in front of you. So essentially the work, it has 5 studies that live behind them. So obviously there's quite a few years of work that's behind this. And really right from the beginning, as I mentioned, I had the users at the end run with Paul, and everyone else there to help guide me along the questions. And so one of the studies that I did was I just did interviews with all different stakeholders I could think of, again, social workers, persons with dementia, police from across the country. And I asked them what type of strategies are they presently using, as well as what types of factors influenced why they chose a particular strategy. Because I was trying to demonstrate towards our entire community that one size does not fit all, and that we have to be aware of different factors that would help them choose something. So from those interviews, I developed this conceptual model. It's very much in its high form. It's too scientific right now, so there's plans of turning it into something that will actually turn into a usable tool. But essentially, from what you can see in front of you, is that it shows just how complex it is in choosing a strategy that works for someone. So things such as the perspective of risk, how we see risk, do we see the risk of getting lost at all? That will influence whether you're going to integrate a strategy or not. Geography, I was very curious in terms of rural and urban communities. Are there differences in the types of strategies? And I learned that yes, indeed there are. Based in some of the rural communities, they're very much a community-based environment. They use their community to keep a lookout for the loved one. But then speaking to those in more of a rural or an urban setting, for me, for example, I don't even know who my neighbors are. So how am I going to get them to keep a lookout for me or for my grandparents? So then maybe things such as GPS technologies would be something that they said that they were more inclined to use. And then as well for factors, cultural and personal factors are huge. So by cultural, we always like to speak about individualistic and collectivist cultures. So individualistic, meaning that I am a very independent person. I want to come up with my decisions myself. And so if you can convince me, or not convince me, but suggest a series of strategies, and if I choose one, then I'm going to use it. Yay, now we have strategy adoption. But if we have a collectivist culture, and let's say an entire family is very close-knit, if you get 2 people on board with a particular strategy, let's say a GPS, but other family members are against it, then it's not going to be implemented. So people like clinicians, Alzheimer's societies, community organizations really need to be aware of that. And then in addition to just that piece, the personal experiences are absolutely massive. So if I have a bad experience with technology, why on earth is someone going to push a GPS device on me? Like, why? You need to be able to include something else. In addition to police, so one of the biggest questions that a lot of the police organizations had mentioned is that people are waiting more than 24 hours to call the police. They just think that there's that automatic perception. Maybe they're afraid. In many cases, they have just a bad experience with police, so they end up waiting to call them. And so we need to be aware of these different factors that would have influenced them. And then as well, personal factors. So based on personality, is that person stubborn? Do they have certain relationships with a particular person? Again, we got to keep in mind of that. And then a few more. So one of the ones that actually I didn't think of, but then again, this is the importance of involving persons living with dementia, is that aspect of stigma. So Roger Marple from Medicine Hat, he pretty much pushed me and he said, this is important. He says, if you do not address stigma, then all the other factors you spoke about don't matter anymore, because stigma is going to be the piece that really completely influences what strategies you're using. And so by stigma, and I know many of you already have, many of you are the ones that are trying to have this whole movement away. But if there's that stigma with dementia, they're not going to admit that the person has dementia. They're not going to seek help. And if they're not going to seek help, then we can't give any of these educational strategies out there. So at the forefront, we need to be able to speak about that stigma piece. And in addition to that stigma piece as well, I've seen many harrowing stories in terms of this aspect of getting lost. So in many cases, people fear that if they get a diagnosis with dementia, they're going to get locked up right away. I've heard that from care partners. I've heard that from persons living with dementia. And because they think that they're going to get locked up and moved away from their family, they delay the process. They refuse to admit that they have dementia. Now, that in itself is awful. So how do we change that? Well, you got to change that by the strategies, because really, because there's so many strategies out there and people are not aware of them, they think that the only solution is to lock them up. They don't think that there's anything else that is out there. So that comes down to me and the Alzheimer's societies and the other community organizations. How can we bring these conversations, and even you guys? And then as well, in terms of isolation, again, those are the ones that are the hardest ones to get. If they live by themselves, if they're away from everyone, those are the ones that need the help the most. But that's a big question that I still have yet to solve. And I'm sure many others are still working on it. How do we get to them? How do we bring them on board to make them aware of how can we keep them safe? And then, of course, everything comes down to affordability and literacy. Can they read it? Can they afford it? You got to keep in mind of those different questions. So with all this being said, with the conceptual model, I'm happy to say that my supervisor, Dr. Lily Liu, and I applied for funding through AgeWell, and we were approved of it with this whole wayfinding topic. So one of the projects will actually be to turn this piece into a tool where it'll almost be a series of questionnaires for healthcare providers, as well as for Alzheimer's societies and community organizations, to simply ask questions based on these different factors, and then how they respond to those factors will link them into the guideline that I will show you next after this slide. Before I speak about the guidelines though, I want to bring up a little terminology that I brought up from these interviews that I did. So essentially I call it the Goldilocks principle on dementia and wayfinding. Again, Goldilocks principle, I try to bring it into mind, something that with the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears that would come into mind for most people, or at least within the Western world. But from the conversations I had in these interviews, again, people did not see the risk of getting lost until something happened, and then all of a sudden they're in crisis mode, and all of a sudden their perception of the risk is so high that they lock them up, completely restrict their independence with hopes that they keep them safe. But again, we know, you all know, that independence is just as important as safety, and there's been a lot of conversations in terms of trying to find this balance between safety and independence. And so I've been trying to call something the optimal risk perception. So can we increase the education, increase the awareness of the risk of getting lost, so people know, yes, I'm at risk, but then you put a preventative strategy, a proactive strategy on board. Once you have that on board, whatever strategy it is, you're no longer in crisis mode. Now you're ahead of the game. So then hopefully we're able to invest in different strategies that can focus on that independence. Because one of the biggest factors as well that we had learned is that essentially we're restricting everything that they have by locking them up. So how can we change it? So now moving on to the guidelines, which is kind of one of the exciting pieces, because I'm actively now trying to send them into the community, because I'm almost on the tail end. I'm actually planning on defending my dissertation in July. So at the very, very end of my degree, which is exciting. But anyways, so these guidelines have been developed, again, from that study that I had mentioned. However, I also did another study on antecedent behaviors. Again, I was just kind of curious in terms of what different behaviors, what different factors would put someone at a particular risk of getting lost. And again, this was inspired from Ron Bellino and his father, where essentially Ron was able to get some clues as to what his dad was doing. And then Ron knew all of a sudden that he was about to go out that door. So I wanted to see what was going on in some of the other communities. And so I was able to collect that through just questionnaires that I sent again across the country. And together, those two studies were used to develop these guidelines. There's 3 versions, one for persons living with dementia, one for community settings, and one for care facility settings. Reason for 3 different versions is I wanted, again, to apply to as many different people as possible. In fact, the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario, when we're speaking about this, they're planning on doing the same thing with their Finding Your website, just to make sure that it applies to as many different audiences. And when I was speaking with Roger, when I was speaking with Paul, they had mentioned, you know, there's nothing for us. as persons with dementia, there's lots of stuff for care partners, but what if I want to be my own active agent in my own care? There's nothing for me that's available. And so that inspired me to be able to develop a guideline specifically for them. Big problem though with developing this is that researchers are afraid still to involve persons with dementia. So for me to pick strategies from the stuff that's been published, there's literally nothing out there. It talks about care partners and what they use, but not persons with dementia. So the guidelines, the strategies that are available in them specifically come from all those persons with dementia that I involved in my studies and what they're using. So really they're the pioneers in terms of sharing their experiences and what they've done to keep themselves safe, and then hoping that we can further enhance this as the time goes. And so in terms of the organization of these guidelines, again, as me as a researcher, the question was, there's a lot of strategies out there. How do I make it simple so people can read? We're super scientific, we can go super fancy, but how do I bring it so everyone can understand? When we deal with this aspect of getting lost, we as clinicians, scientists, we always think of it as disease progression. So we think, okay, if someone's diagnosed with dementia, they're at a low risk of getting lost. No, as they go along their journey, they're at a higher risk of getting lost. But that's not the case. What we have learned is that you can get a diagnosis with dementia and you can be lost the next day. You can be lost an hour later. So it can happen almost immediately. So we need to be able to change that. So that's why I did this based on risk. So as you can see here, there's a low level of risk. I have the types of things that might put that person at that low level of risk. And then underneath that, I have very generic strategies that people can look at and try to invest in. And I've turned it into a checkmark box just to further help us, because for me, if I checkmark it, then I know, okay, yeah, I'm at that level of risk. And I have it for each one. So you have medium, you have high, and I've been really trying to be cognizant about language. Again, that's why trying to involve persons with dementia and care partners have been so vital, because I want to get away from the stigma. I don't want to add to the stigma. So they have been amazing in terms of making sure that I bring in the proper terminology. And then even like the term of unplanned absence that you see in the right-hand corner, that was a tricky one. How do I describe if someone is lost? I had no idea. So it was actually one of the community organizations that suggested unplanned absence is something that isn't stigmatizing, but is something that people can understand. And within the guidelines, of course, because I'm trying to change this field, I'm trying to get away from locked doors. And so I have some subliminal messaging on the bottom that's trying to bring up the conversations. So one of them that I've already mentioned is that you can transition to lesser or greater levels of risk at any moment. Again, making people aware that you can get hung up on a low level of risk, but you need to be prepared for all avenues. Again, trying to make sure that people stay at that optimal risk perception and that Goldilocks principle I spoke about. And then the other one actually came from Christine Thalker, that I'm sure some of you know from BC. She was actually working in a long-term care facility for many years and is now living with dementia. And she explicitly spoke to me when I had an interview, and she says, then unfortunately, she says, people are completely restricting someone's ability to wander. That people are getting confused with this aspect of wandering and getting lost. Sometimes wandering leads to getting lost, but they're separate entities. And unfortunately, because there's that misunderstanding, that's because people start to completely restrict anyone's ability to wander. And by wandering, it's not the aimless movement. I can go out in my community and say, I'm going to go for a wander. I can go out into the community, or even when I think about J.R.R. Tolkien, not all those who wander are lost, right? That's the positive terminology that no one is using. And so within this, I have that you need to apply education and proactive strategies as soon as possible so you can encourage safe wandering. Let people go for walks. Let people live a life. Do not lock them up, because it's not going to make anything better. And so that was Christine's messaging, that she wanted to make sure we're addressed throughout all three guidelines. And then in addition, you can see that there's one piece that's bolded underneath the different strategies, the call 911. And again, that was just because the police and many of the community organizations, they said that this is not getting out there enough. And so I'm hoping by bolding it, people can understand that if you're lost, even as a person with dementia, if you have a phone on you, and I've spoken to police about this, if you're lost and you don't know where you are, if you just call 911, they said that they want to get that call and they can help you. So, but the only unfortunate part is that there's such a negative stigma on police. I was actually afraid of police until I did all these interviews with them. And now I find out just how warm and bubbly all of them are. But that's something else that we need to be able to add and bring forward. So now we have to start to visualize, this is a front page of a handout, but there's also has to be a back page, because this doesn't guide anyone on a particular strategy. So this is the back page. Essentially, you'd flip it, And I have a list of the available strategies, again, trying to not provide too many words, but trying to provide enough guidance. And essentially I have things like, different links that people can go to, like the Finding Your Way program. And then there's other different things, such as they have a tac.findyourwayontario.ca is like this product repository. These are strictly Ontario on this, but again, this is just an example because I'm really trying to focus on not letting this stuff sitting on a shelf. I'm trying to disseminate it. I'm trying to get it out there for people to use. I developed these guidelines in a way that they sit on Google Slides. So, and essentially when a community organization, anyone is interested in using them, I give them permission to have their own version of their slides. And then what they can do is that they can upload any type of contact information. If you're in Alberta and you have certain types of contact information with the Alzheimer's Society there that they want to get out to the community. If you're in Saskatchewan, it's really custom tailored, and I've let the organizations do that where they can go in and add in whatever information they want, because I want it to be a one-stop shop. To be able to have that available. And so as well, the cool thing is that with most guidelines, at least within our world, is that they become outdated quite quickly. I can talk about these strategies now, and because this field is evolving so rapidly, and I'm able to see it with being at the forefront of the consortium, there had to be another way. And so as I'm constantly learning of these new strategies, or if I'm going through different iterations of these guidelines and getting feedback from people, if you have permission to those slides, I will actually go into your own folder and I will update it all for you. So it's constantly live, it's constantly updated, which I think is something that's one of the first in terms of really trying to keep the stuff updated as much as possible. And so now the last piece to speak about is on the Rapid Response Project. Again, you can see some familiar faces in the photo. So essentially, as I mentioned, I have had a close relationship with the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario probably since 2016. So my supervisor, she ended up running a locator device project in the province, where they essentially got different dyads, so care partners and persons with dementia, to use strategies or use the different GPS devices. And since ASO heard of that, they connected us, and we gave a presentation alongside Ron Bellino and a few others at the Locating Technology Forum. It was in Toronto in 2016. And then things have really been blooming ever since then, just in trying to work as this part of this partnership. And one of these was this rapid response project where essentially I got funded through an organization called MyTax. MyTax is a little different in the research world, so this is how we get our funding. This was my salary, so I'm not a completely broke student. But essentially the way that it worked is it focuses on the industry. So instead of me being in my ivory tower, not speaking to anyone and being my own little world, MyTax really pushes for us as young researchers to work with non-for-profit organizations as well as for-profit organizations. So it allows me to be able to understand exactly what the community needs rather than me just trying to assume what people need. And so that MyTax was with the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario, and the real purpose of the Rapid Response Project that they wanted me to become a part of was to develop a best police practice resource, again, for persons with dementia that get lost. The police over and over again have been coming to ASO asking them questions on what are the best strategies. There's this Project Lifesaver, there's Medic Alert, but they all wanted to know what was best or what different protocols, how can they communicate with persons with dementia, many different things that the police don't get right now. And so ASO brought me on board to do two different studies, again, because we're always like to focus on something called evidence-based practice. So if you have research that's backed behind a different program that's been developed, that just further strengthens it, because now you have a university that's done some of the work. But in addition to my research world, again, one of the important factors, again, a part of this partnerships, was I was also a member of this advisory committee that they were formed. So I brought in the research perspective, but then we had Paul Lee, we had Ron Bellino that were there, we had police representatives from across Ontario, again, because it was an Ontario-based project. And we also had Alzheimer's societies from across the province that were a part of this advisory committee. We met every month, and essentially from the research that I did, and then from everyone's own experiences, we used that to develop this best police practice guideline. And it was really cool to be able to see the development, seeing all of us work again as equals. We don't have any hierarchy, we're all together for the same cause. And essentially, once we developed the preliminary version, again, making sure that we can involve as many different people as possible, we ended up running a series of forums. There are smaller forums across Ontario. So for Kathy Conway, who was heading this project at the time, her and I almost did a road show. So I got a really good experience of Ontario. And of course, back in February, that was when all of you guys got your ice storms, for those of you that live there. So I had quite the experience. Started off in Kingston and again, the forums, if you know ASO enough, we had, again, persons with dementia. We always make sure that there was one representative that was there, care partner, and then lots of police, lots of Alzheimer's societies to hear about what we're about. Started off in Kingston, and again, had some experiences. My flight was canceled, and we eventually figured my way out, and we made it up to Sudbury. Did a forum in Sudbury to represent the North, then made our way down to Hamilton. And again, this is how determined Kathy Conway and I were. Our flight in Sudbury was canceled, so we rented a vehicle, and then Kathy doesn't drive, so I had to, little old Burton, driving through in this ice storm, trying to make my way to Hamilton. But we made it, and that was where Paul and Ron were. And again, got representatives from there as well as from London and from Newmarket. So got every single region involved, and it was great because, again, we opened up these different forums with different perspectives. So Paul shared his story a couple times. Ron shared his with his perspective of this issue. We had a police member. We made sure that someone was always there to show their perspective of what they dealt with. And then we brought that together to get consultations and get people to just give us feedback on what we had developed. And as we speak, and I said that it was launched May 1st, but I lied. I looked on their website and it's already on there. So if you end up going to the findingyourwayontario.ca website, it's the first responders. And so you can actually go and see what we've developed so far. Again, it was only developed in a year. There's lots of work that needs to be done. But the exciting part about the advisory committee is all of us are so in love with this field that we've decided to stay together and continue for as long as they need us, pretty much, just to try to further enhance and develop this resource package. And there's a lot of interest because right now it's just Ontario, but I've been speaking to police in BC, in Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and all of them want it too. So now we're hoping that we can bring this nationally, and with the Finding Your Way program really being at the forefront of all of that. So other than that, though, this is all I have in terms of the presentation. The next piece, though, that I would like, unless there's any questions, is I really want to be able to try to have a discussion on the guideline I developed and see if I can get any feedback from those of you here. Yep.
Sorry, Nolena. Let's just take a pause for a minute here.
No problem.
And just open it up before we go into your next piece here.
Sounds good.
So, what questions do we have for Nolena?
Okay, I've got a couple. I think Mary Beth sent me a couple of questions from an individual, and during your presentation, Nolena, you answered them. One was, is wayfinding another name for wandering?
Yes, it is.
It is. And the other is, this individual wanted to know if they could join the consortium.
They certainly can. Again, we keep it open to everyone. And just to build on that wayfinding piece, again, with that term wandering, us as researchers always used wandering. If you end up looking through the literature, it's wandering. But what we have learned with the consortium, and I've even learned from my own experiences, again, is it's a stigmatized term. And we want to get away from the stigma. And especially in the UK, they don't use it at all. And my supervisor has learned that I've even changed how I word things. So I always say at risk of getting lost, I don't say wandering anymore, just because I'm so cognizant that I don't want to upset anyone. And so we used wayfinding because everyone in the consortium that we spoke to, it was the less stigmatized term. But you'll see that we're using it interchangeably right now. But one of the objectives of the consortium is actually to come up with a term that isn't stigmatized and is something that people are willing to use, so that I'm no longer flipping between three different ones.
If I may ask, is there actually a definition then of wayfinding?
There is a definition, but it's not specifically around this field. So again, it's for hoping within the consortium that we'll have a publication that's directly linked to this.
Maybe we can get Webster to include.
Lori also had a question.
Sorry. Maybe
Lori,
we could
over
get.
to you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Noelana, is
Yeah,
that how you pronounce your name?
it is.
First of all, amazing presentation. Wow, I'm so impressed with all the work you've done. I'm thrilled, actually. I'm a caregiver for my parents. My mother had Alzheimer's, my father has dementia. I've been doing this for 4 years. Anyway, I'm just saying I really appreciate what you're doing. I had a question about calling 911.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could make
Of course.
a suggestion. suggestion, just call it going for a walk, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Instead of wandering. But what did the police say? You said they were all very friendly and willing to help. What would they do if my father was out taking a walk and got lost and called 911? What would they do?
They would, so they have a whole step of different procedures where they'd have to go to the home, double check that the person is gone, that they're missing, but then they'll go out into the community and look for them. So they'd do their initial search.
Oh, no. Okay, so I was understanding it that the person who was lost was being encouraged to call 911.
Oh yeah, so if they do call 911, so that's something that they had mentioned, then they would simply talk on the phone and try to guide them, and if not, then they try to find them.
Oh, if they don't know where they live, though.
They don't know where to live. I don't know what the police do, but they said pretty much they told me is call us and we'll do it, and we'll bring them home. Yeah.
I think my concerns for my father would be that the police might take him to a clinic and or a health place that he doesn't want to be in. So I was just wondering how that would work, but
that's something that
thank you for answering.
No problem. That's something that needs to come with a rapid response project. So with that best police practice, we do have steps that we've spoken about that we want to be able to include in there. So then we're hoping if we can begin to educate and almost make it mandatory for all police, then if they do call 911, then the police are going to have a better inclination of what to do instead of sending them right to a hospital.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Ron, over to you.
Just on that question, I have my own question, but Jamie, are you online here? Your video's not there.
Yes, I am, Ron, and I would be inclined to think that they would go get the person and then
Figure it out.
solve and figure out where they're coming from and deliver them back home.
So just clarification, so people know who you are, Jamie. If you can tell who you are. Again, I know Nolana mentioned it, but just very briefly. So we do have police here, well, former police.
Yeah, I was with the Ontario Provincial Police for 31 years, and for the last 9 years of my career, I was in charge of search and rescue for the province of Ontario.
Okay.
Thanks, Jamie.
And I was involved actually in their original Finding Your Way program on the technical committee for that. So. And
I will actually be doing my postdoctoral fellowship in September with Jamie, so that just kind of shows all these partnerships growing.
Excellent. Any other questions before we move over into the next segment?
Yes. So actually, I had a question myself. But Lori, just very briefly, to respond to your situation. If my dad was found, but he was found by paramedics. They had to determine that he had to go to the hospital, okay, and get checked up, okay, before sending him back home. So I think. I know, Nolana, we talked about it. Safety, in my opinion, okay, that's my view, trumps everything else. Okay, safety, if that means, that's my concern, okay? But I do need to bring up the issue of the word wandering, and I might be stirring the pot here again. I'm just curious from my friends here on the call who are living with dementia, and I've had chat with other friends internationally on that term, okay? Because it's taken me a few years to understand the term wandering, the word wandering, labels, okay, the concern about labels and stigma. I do a lot of conversations and presentations, as some of you know, to many caregivers. That's my crowd that I speak to a fair bit. And if it's really that big of a deal, okay, if that word wandering, because on my end, it's taken me a while that I have a defense why we should be keeping the word wandering, but I'll hold off on that for now.
If you're looking for feedback, if it's offensive, for me personally, yes, it's offensive.
Okay.
I don't know if if we're looking to do a poll or anything, but.
Okay. Yeah, I just, because I want someone to define for me what I should be using, okay? Yeah. In the extreme case, everyone that's defending it is in a position to defend it, okay? Like that's able to explain I was going somewhere. If I were to say in the worst situation for my dad, okay, he would maybe have an intention of a place to go from point A to point B. He gets distracted and he's no longer trying to get to point B. He's not trying to get to work. And if I were to find him on the road and I would say, Dad, where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? He says, I have no idea what I'm trying to do. I'm not sure where I'm trying to go, okay? What do you call that? Okay, that's what I'd be saying. Is he trying to walk somewhere? He doesn't even know that he's trying to walk home or get somewhere. So that's more my challenge, that it changes from intention to now, is he technically just wandering lost? Okay, I can say he's lost, okay, but he's just walking around, and that's what I've heard from some of the severe cases. So that's the only reason why I got to say, what's that word am I going to use? Okay, what's the phrase? So anyways, I'll leave it for now. That's a whole debate another day.
Thanks, Ron. I got another question I got to go to Ron here. I'm just watching at my time.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Ron Bellino is always intriguing with his questions, so I guess we'll have an interesting follow-up perhaps on that one. Ron Posno, please. Saw a wave there. Ryan, we just need you to unmute yourself. Or Lisa, if you can help out. Hang on there for a sec, Ron.
Let me see, Roger.
Okay, now we got it.
Okay. Yep, you're good to go, Ron.
All right. Mary Beth, I was particularly interested in the fact that you considered a negative thing, because I'm very naive about this. When I hear the term wander, I'm still in the happy wanderer phase. And Ron is pointing out that as you go through the walk, your whole feeling, the whole construct could change tremendously. The guy is just out for a walk, he's got every intent that he goes, and then he forgets that. So then he has another objective. And I guess it becomes worrisome when the fellow, I say male, but I don't mean male, it could be female too, but when it gets into the fearful state,
Yeah.
then he
Ron,
is absolutely
right.
terrified of where he happens to be. But I don't see that the word wander is necessarily negative. It's really just the kind of phases and steps and word and state of where he's at during this wandering that is bothers me.
Hey,
So
Ron.
good point. And Ron, I actually went the wrong way now that I'm thinking more rather than just jumping on it. Wondering, I do find, okay. So that was my mistake in actually going the other way.
Oh.
I just want to make sure that we talk about one topic in particular, because I'm seeing, where's my girl, Susan Ray, way up in the Yukon, I believe, in the challenges of rural Canada, which is, I can't even imagine how. Is there something specific within this project or potential projects that will focus in on, working with rural organizations and people on how to help with wayfinding?
That's currently in the works, and that's why I had some of the interviewees that I spoke to were from some of the more remote northern Alberta communities, but I know the Yukon will be even more so. So we're hoping that hopefully eventually being involved with the National Dementia Strategy, because I know that this issue of getting lost isn't on there. We're hoping we can put it on their radar, and then we can start to use that to try to involve them in a certain way, because yeah, that's a completely different story in terms of what they can do. So we're hoping that we can begin to change that.
Okay, thanks. Susan, I noticed you took yourself off mute. Any comments?
Well, yeah, there's just so much to do up here because there is so little happening, though it's crawling along and awareness is starting to grow. And so just for myself as a caregiver and to work with my husband, on the website, are there suggestions of what kind of identification one could carry or have? Because my husband loves to go out for walks, and we'll go to other cities and he'll go out for a walk, and then I'm scared he's going to get lost. And actually he did, but he did find his way back. And so it's a very real concern to me, because up here in Whitehorse, half the people, and well, not half the people, but it's a completely different scenario than being in Calgary or Ottawa or Vancouver, places like that. So I'm looking for information just for myself as to what we can do. Like you mentioned medical alert, but I just don't know what's available.
And that's the whole purpose of these guidelines. So again, I'll make it available for you guys to go to. But in terms of where you guys are, I've been really trying to advocate for Medical Alert. They have been amazing. They've just signed on as one of our partners for our new and up and coming project. They really want to learn. They want to be able to make things better. And between the bracelets that they have, with the Connect Protect program, there's many things that are out there. But again, Medical Alert, it has a fee associated with it. So within the guidelines, there's other suggestions as well. So
That's good. And up here, because we're so remote, and I'm sure you have that in parts of Alberta, but we just leave the city for a little bit. We're out of any kind of connection kind of thing. So I mean, it does pose a problem. We're going on steps by steps. I really am excited about what you're doing, and I'm only one person here trying to get more people involved, and we'll just go as fast as we can. And
yeah, well, with your connections where you are, again, I'm always open. If at any point any of you online today want me to give a presentation similar to what I've done, I would love to be able to speak about the guidelines, some of the work that we're doing, and just getting more people involved. Because again, the more voices we have, the stronger and the more movement we're going to see in this field. So. And unfortunately, we don't have as much of a connection to the north yet, and that's actually on our radar. We just haven't quite gotten there yet. So,
well, and in the north, the northern part of the country, including Northwest Territories and Nunavut, I'm not aware of much going on. I think us going to the National Dementia Strategy kind of stirred the pot here, and so things are starting to happen. Slowly, but they're happening, which is exciting. So, it's a totally different beast up here.
It is.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
So, we got Paul. Any more last questions? Okay, Paul.
Okay. The word wandering, I see some people have a problem. Why not use an Australian term? Walkabout.
That could be something. And again, that's something you can bring to the consortium, Paul. And again, anyone that wants to become involved in the consortium, that could be part of that conversation.
Thanks, Paul. For someone who has been lost, myself, it's a terrible feeling to be lost and not know your way back. For me in particular, hotels are extremely difficult to remember. And, just even the things like the keys don't have, for instance, sometimes they don't have numbers anymore on them. And so there's some simplistic things that, maybe would be tailor-made possibly for things like hotels, because I have to have my own strategy anytime I'm within a hotel now, because of the one time. The second time I was lost, it was actually my first time, and I did have the police pick me up. And so what they did in that case, it was a snowstorm that I went out in my pajamas, and because I was angry, and I left our home, not knowing really where I was going, just that I was going somewhere. Where it was, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so my partner did contact, I think I was on a list somewhere, and the police followed me back home. They managed to talk with me, and then, followed me because I didn't want to get in the police car. So through the snowstorm, I just, retraced my steps in the snow and got back home. And, it was a good ending. Obviously, I'm still here today. So, I know from my heart, because of those experiences, how important this topic is. So I just want to say we really want to thank you as a young researcher, really making waves in the world. And of course, because you're Canadian, it's an extra bonus, right?
Yeah.
So, we just want to say thank you very much for joining us here today. There's definitely lots of, I think, potential for all kinds of synergies that can come out of it. So
Thank you. And one final note, because I know it's 3:00 over here at West. Is again, I'm always seeking feedback on these guidelines. So again, you can see my email right here. The survey takes 5 to 10 minutes. I can do it in a paper copy, where I can email it so you can print it and write it, or I have an online Google survey. If you're interested in looking at these guidelines, if you want a copy to them, if you want to provide me feedback, please email me and let me know. I'm at 65 survey responses, and I would love to be able to even surpass 70 and have your voices included. So,
and there you go.
I'm still curious what the definition of wayfinding is.
Oh, sorry, Roger.
I'm still curious what the definition of wayfinding is.
The present definition is just essentially trying to find your way to the end destination that you're planning on going to. And so that's why we used it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's you're trying to go somewhere, whether you remember where you were intending on going or not, but it's trying to guide the person, whether it's memory cues, whether it's all these different strategies, and just helping them get from that point A to the point B. And again, it gets away from that stigma of reducing their ability of being able to be out in the community, right? It promotes it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Ron, your definition of using wandering, Ron Pasno kind of nailed it pretty good. But my definition of wandering is like I was at the Calgary Comic Con, and I was lost most of the time there, but I had a hoot. Right? Like I'm lost pretty well the whole time. But I was having a good time. I knew I was within a building, right? So I wasn't, even though I was lost, I was still having a good time. So there's different levels of being lost. But if you're looking for a line in the sand to call it wandering, it's when you're stressed out.
Yeah.
And you're like starting to go, holy shit, this is bad. I'm seriously lost. And you're trying to think of ideas on what to do at that point.
That's a good idea, Roger.
So there's where I draw the line in the sand when you're stressed out. Mm-hmm. I shared that story with you. The most lost I've ever been is in the hallway of the condo I live in, right? So that's wandering, right? But even if you're wandering and you have the logic to figure out what to do, in other words, you told me about Life 360, Ron. So if I got the logic to say, oh crap, I'm really lost here, but if I had the common sense to call my brother and say, hey, Bob, I'm really lost, help me get home. That's not wandering, because I have the logic to figure out what to do to get home, right? It's when you don't have that logic. That's when it gets really scary. So that's my answer to your question, Ron.
Thank you, Roger. Just before we go, I just want to let everyone know that this event has been recorded with the intention of posting it. Lisa, help me out to somewhere. I'm not quite sure.
We'll post it. We have a closed Facebook group that we'll post it in, but we would also like to send it to all the participants or all the members of Dementia Advocacy Canada, because there's people who were unable to attend today who are really interested in hearing the presentation.
I'm glad I didn't swear.
We would have bleeped it out, Roger. We got your back. No worries. So thank you everyone again, and Nolena will have her contact information, and I'm sure this just is the first of many conversations.
Exactly.
So thank you to everyone, and have a great day, and see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very good.
Very
good.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you.
You rocked it. Well done.
Are you done?
Yeah.
That was it? You just listened?
So do you want to do the stop on your end?
I did some talking.
Did you?
Yeah.
I didn't hear you.